The purpose of this lesson is to learn how to use tables in HTML, the appropriate uses for tables on a web page, how not to use a table, the basic table elements, table headers, body, and footer, and accessibility features. In the last video, I created a template, which is just simply called template, and I discussed using this to be able to make the next web pages. So from now on, anytime that I want to make a new web page, I just simply need to copy this. So I'm going to right drag it, copy it, and then rename this. And this document is going to deal with tables, so I'm going to call it tables.html. And then I also need to add a link to that document to my index. So I'm going to edit it. And to add a link to it, we just simply come into our nav section, add a new line item that has an anchor tag with a hypertext reference equal to tables.html. And I'm going to call it table basics. And then just to make sure that my link works, I'm going to drag index.html to Internet Explorer. Here's my table basics link. And when I click on it, I now go to the template file that I created. Now I've modified the template a little bit. And what I did was just for title, I called it page name, the header I called it page name, and the only link that I have in this document right now is to go to home. So this page is actually called Table Basics. And I'm going to give it the same name for the header sections H1. And that's it. That is the basic elements for my page. I no longer have to recreate all of this stuff. It's already here in my template. Now you've seen tables on the web, and a table is just something that has columns and cells. It's like an Excel spreadsheet, things of that nature, being on a web page. Back in the early days of the internet, we didn't have CSS and we didn't have other good ways to actually format our pages. So what you would see a lot of times is web designers that would use a table and modify it to contain data. Now, while that worked back in the 90s, that is no longer a legitimate way to create a web page. So with that said, you should never be using a table to create your web page and do the layout. You should only be using a table for what is called tabular data. It's data that belongs in a table, things like a financial report or things like a television listing, which is actually what we are going to create today. So a table starts with a table tag and it ends with a table tag. Now a table is an element that is made up of rows. So our table is going to have what are called TRs, which is a table row. So here's a row, here's another row, and here's another row. Okay, so the table itself has a beginning and an ending, and then each row has a beginning and an ending. And we are going to put some data in the middle here in just a minute. So what you'll notice is that our table is always made up of rows. So we need to know how many rows are going to be in the table. And then once we know how many rows there are going to be, then we have to know how many columns there are going to be. And the reason for that is, at least for now, we have to have the same number of columns in every row. And as we go along throughout this lesson, I'll show you other ways around that. Now the table that I'm going to create will have 3 columns in each row. So what I'm going to do is in this line, the TR to TR, I want to put what are called table data. So I'm going to have a TD, and our TDs will have a beginning and an ending. So that right there is one cell that is in my table. So that's the first column and row meeting place. That's called a cell. Okay, so I'm going to make a second one, which has a beginning and a close. and then a third one which also has a beginning and a close. Now what this is, I have the table row that contains the first cell, the second cell, and the third cell. I haven't put any data in it yet. I've only made the cells for the data to be contained. Okay, so this is going to be row 1, column 1. In between these is row 1, column 2. In between these is row 1, column 3. And what you'll see is just by me adding text to this, it's getting a little hard to follow what's going on. So what I'm going to do to fix this is I'm going to start putting things on their own individual lines. If you remember from a previous lesson, HTML ignores what is called white space. And what that means is it doesn't care how many spaces I put between elements. No matter what, it will only look at one space. So what that means is I can actually put a line break in between each of these and it will not care. HTML will ignore it. The browser just simply continues on as if they were all in one line. So I'm breaking all of my TDs up into their own rows, or I'm sorry, their own lines. And my TRs go like this. So what I can see is here is my table. Here is the first row contained between these two tags. And inside of this row, I have 1, 2, 3 columns. Okay, I can do the same thing with my other rows. So what I will do here is indent. I have a TD, which is my first data element. I have another TD and another one. So I have 3 columns contained within this row. Then I get the exact same thing with these. So you'll notice that I'm indenting these, and the reason for it is I want to be able to see that my table contains the TRs and my TRs contain the TDs. It just makes it easier to see what is on the page and what belongs to what. So I'm going to start putting data in these other ones. This is row 2, column 1. I'm going to put a space here for this one. This is row 2, column 2. This one is row 2, column 3. And then all of these are in the third row, so this is going to be row 3, column 1. Row 3, column 2. And then this last one is row 3, column 3. Okay, so I'm going to save it, come over here and refresh, and I now see something that looks like this. Now I see data, but it doesn't look like the nice table format that I want to see. We're used to seeing borders around it. So I'm first going to show you the old way to make the border around it, just as a real quick way for you to see how it works. And then later in this lesson, I will show you how to do it the proper way with CSS. So what I am going to do is up here in the table tag, I am going to add an attribute that just simply says border equals 1. And this is the old way to do it. This is deprecated. You should not be doing it this way, but I am showing you just so you can see what happens. And like I said, later in this lesson, I'll show you the right way to do it. So now when I refresh, I see something that looks more like this. This is what we're used to seeing. But you'll notice it has that 90s feel to it because it has the 2 lines. And we're used to seeing in our tables nowadays just simply 1 pixel worth of a border between the different columns. So if you notice, this is row 1, column 1. So everything down is column 1. Everything down here is column 2. Everything down here is column 3. Across, this is row 1. Across, this is row 2. And then across this is row 3. So I am keeping track of where things are in each individual row by me manually counting them. This is row 1, row 2, and row 3. There is nothing that specifically counts it for me. I have to keep track of them. I told you at the beginning of this lesson that we have to have the same number of columns in every row. and that is partially true. What I mean by that is I want to take this row 3 column 1 and join it with this row 3 column 2. I want to make that one big cell. Well, the problem is I can't just simply get rid of this middle column, or certain browsers won't render it properly. So what I need to do is I need to account for every single row that's in here. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of row 3 column 2. But now you notice I have 3 columns in the first row, I have 3 columns in the second row, and only 2 in the third row. So what I have to do is to account for that one particular cell taking up the space of 2 columns, I'm going to use a tag called callSpan. And what this is my column span. How many columns should this particular row or this particular data table element span? So I'm going to say it spans 2. And now what will happen is when I refresh the page over here, you will notice that this first column now takes up the first and second cell position. So I'm still accounting for 3 data items. Here's 1, 2, 3. I always have to account for the 3 of them. Now this call span allows me to span 2 columns, but I can also span 2 rows with a row span tag. So I'm going to undo my changes that I've made in this document. Put it back so we have all of these cells in row 3. Okay, now what I want to do, after I refresh, is I want to take row 2, column 1, and I want to mix it with row 3, column 1. Okay, so now what this means is I want to get rid of row 3, column 1, and what I want to do is I want this row 2, column 1 to span down into that third row. So what I'm going to do is go to row 2, column 1, and this time I'm going to do a row span equals 2. And now what I'm telling it is that this particular cell here is going to span 2 rows. Okay, so now what I need to consider is that this is spanning the 2 rows, so this one cell accounts for this first cell. And then I have 2 more elements that account for the other 2 cells that are in row 3. So I'm going to save and refresh, and now I will see that row 2, column 1 now takes up both of rows 2 and 3 first cell. So I have call span to span columns, and I have row span to span rows. Alright, so for now I'm going to put this document back the way that it was, so that way I have my original table. I want to add another piece of information to the table. What I want to do is I want to put a line above the table that describes what the data is that is contained in the table. And I could do it a couple of ways. Before my table, up here, I could put a paragraph tag that has a description of it. I could make an H2 tag. I can do it a couple different ways, but the best way to do it is actually through what is called the caption tag. Now this belongs inside of the table. I just have caption, and then what is caption? Well, the caption is going to be to describe the table. So the data that's contained in this table is table data for this example. Okay, so now what this does is it actually puts table data centered just above the table, and it is now actually a part of the table. So if I move the table somewhere else on the page, I don't lose this, this layout. It will stay together no matter where I put it on the page. Okay, so I want to make this actual usable data so you can see what it would be like. Okay, this table is going to contain TV show listings. And instead of row 1, row 1, column 2, and so forth, this is going to be the name of the TV show and the time that it is played on 2 different channels. Okay, so my first item is going to be show 1, so whatever the name of the first show is. And on one channel it plays at 5:30 p.m. On the other channel it plays at 8:15 p.m. Okay, so I'm just simply replacing some text over here. So now I have show 1 plays on the first channel at 5:30 p.m. It plays on the second channel at 8:15 p.m. Okay, so I'm going to make up some data for my other 2 rows here. So I have show 2. All right, well that plays on the first channel at 7:30 p.m. and whatever this show is plays on the second channel at 11:30 p.m. And then I have show 3, whatever show 3 is, and that plays on the first channel at 3:30 p.m. and it plays on the second channel at let's say 6 o'clock p.m. Okay, so I'm just simply entering some dummy data in here just so we can see the way that this works. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to tell it what this data is. Now I have a way that I could do that, which would just be to simply add another row that has some more TD elements in it. But I have a better way to do that, and what I am going to do is I'm going to create another row. So I have a TR that has an ending, and instead of TDs, I'm going to create what are called THs. These are table headings. Okay, now the thing is I want my table to show the first element here is blank. So I'm going to have a blank cell here, and then it's going to say channel 1 here and channel 2 here. Well, for me to put something blank here, I can't just leave it blank inside of my TH tags. So I have to go back and use what is called an HTML entity, which is the same thing that we used for the copyright symbol at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a non-breaking space in, ampersand NBSP for non-breaking space. So now there's actually data in there, it just happens to be a space. Okay, so TH for the second column is channel 1. And the TH for the third column is channel 2. So now what I will see is something that looks like this. And if you notice the THs, they will automatically get bolded. So that way we can see if they have a little bit of importance, they have some emphasis to the table. So I now have a row that has headings, which are THs, and then I have rows that contain the table data. So now when I look at this, I can see, okay, well this is channel 1, show 1 plays at 5:30. This is channel 2, show 1 plays at 8:15. I can very easily look at this and I can tell as a human being what time show 3 plays on channel 2. The problem is the computer doesn't necessarily understand what this data means. And what we need to worry about when we make websites is we need to make them accessible. So if I were making a TV guide for all the TV shows that we're playing right now, and somebody had a vision impairment and they had to have a screen reader on the computer that actually went through and read the data in this table, it would make absolutely no sense to them. Here's what the screen reader would actually read. It would say nothing, because this one's blank. Channel 1, channel 2, show 1, 5:30 p.m., 8:15 p.m., show 2, 7:30 p.m., 11:30 p.m., show 3, 3:30 p.m., 6 p.m. Which, if you just think about it, if you go through the table like that, you can't figure out what time each individual show runs, because it's just simply spewing off data instead of actually making sense. So I want to make it where it actually will read the data to me in a usable manner. To cause a screen reader to read this properly, I need to start providing some tags for elements that are in the page. Okay, so I need to look at this from a human perspective. How would I look at it? Okay, I'm going to look at it where channel 1 is a column that pertains to all data about channel 1. And then this column is all stuff that pertains to things about channel 2. So what I want to do is in my TH tag for channel 1 and channel 2, I want to give them an ID. So the first one, I'm going to say that the ID is channel 1, no space. And then in my second one, I'm going to say that the ID is equal to channel 2, no space. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm giving a screen reader something to reference. All right, but it still doesn't make any sense what it's referencing. So what I'm going to do is, for the benefit of the screen reader, I am going to come down to each data element, and I'm going to put in a headers attribute, And the headers attribute is going to be what channel does it belong to, or which of those IDs up above. So I'm going to say channel 1. Okay, so now it knows that this particular piece of data belongs to channel 1. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with my other ones. So this is channel 2. And then I have this one down here is headers equals channel 1. And this one is headers equals channel 2, and so forth. So I'm going to do this for the last one here. So this one is going to be headers equals channel 1, and this one will be headers equals channel 2. Okay, so now what I have done by doing this is not really made any change to the document over here. I just refreshed and it doesn't look any different. But what I just did is I caused a screen reader to understand how to read this data to the user. So now what the user would hear would be channel 1, show 1, 5:30 p.m. Channel 2, show 1, 8:15 p.m. Channel 1, show 2, 7:30 p.m. Channel 2, show 2, 11:30 p.m. and so forth. So what it does is it provides a means for the screen reader to understand what order it should be reading these things, so that way the person listening to it can possibly figure out what data they need. You can tell that very quickly that this is going to become tedious. If I have a large amount of data in my table, I'm going to be typing this for a lot of cells. In HTML5, there is a new way to handle this so that you don't have to do the ID and headers for every single column and TD that you want to reference for the screen reader. So I'm going to show you how it works, and then I'll explain to you why we don't necessarily want to do that. So I'm going to undo these, put this back the way that it was. Okay, so now we're back to the way that we were to begin with, and this time I'm going to do it a little bit differently, and instead of typing an ID here, I'm going to say scope. And my scope equals the column, the entire length of the column. And I will do the same thing for channel 2. So scope equals column. And now what I have done to a screen reader is I've caused it to realize that this item here belongs to all the elements that are straight down that column. And I've caused it to realize that channel 2 belongs to all the elements that are straight down this column. And by not referencing this first column, the screen reader will understand that this piece of information plus this piece of information will lead to this piece of information. This is a lot easier on me as a developer, but the problem is there are still a large amount of people out there that are not using browsers that are fully HTML5 compliant, which means that I am leaving a large amount of people that have older browsers or older screen readers that won't understand how to read this data. So while this saves me a lot of time as a developer, and I need to use the other method instead, at least until the majority of people are using the newer form for the screen readers. I told you that I used this border equals 1 up here, and it's actually deprecated, which means that we should not be using this. Instead, what we should be doing is styling our table in the style section in our head section up in the top of our document. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to style my table. And remember, anytime I have a tag, I can reference the entire tag up here in the style. So my table gets styled like this. And what I'm going to do is I want to specify some things. First one is I want to specify the width of my table. I don't like how it's all squished together, so I have this width attribute that I can play with, and I can set its value to something like 250. All right, I'm sorry, 250 pixels. Okay, so now if I do this, it spreads it out just a little bit, but you'll notice that I've lost my my lines because I took away that border equals 1. So I'm going to spread it out just a little bit more. And there we go. Now you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so we played with border equals 1 below, but really what I want to play with here is the border up in the CSS section. So my border, just like we did in one of the prior videos where we put a border around elements on the page, such as our paragraph tags, I can do the same thing here. So I am going to set my border to be 1 pixel solid black. And I also mentioned before that you should not use definite values for colors. We should be using hexadecimal values. So for the sake of this lesson, I'm going to use black, but I should have used $0.000000. Okay, so what I'm doing is it has a width, and I set the border. Now this is not going to work as you expect it to right away. When I refresh my page, all I've done is I've actually applied the border to the outside of my table. I haven't touched any of the data elements yet. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to tell it also my table data elements are formatted this way. And so those are going to be border 1 pixel solid black also. And when I refresh, now it's something that looks more like what we had before, except you'll notice that my THs didn't get applied. So I can come into here and I can say TH, and those also have a border of 1 pixel solid black. So all of those lines of CSS to get the exact same thing that we had with border equals 1 in our table. However, this is the proper way to do it, and I will show you why here in just a minute. Before I show you that, I want to show you a shortcut. All right, if you notice, I have my TDs and my THs, and I have those both formatted the same. I can leave them separate like this, or the other way to do this is to list all of the types of tags that I want to manipulate in one line. So what I mean is I'm going to apply this to any of the TDs, comma, any of the THs. And this is the same as having it written out as 2 separate lines. So now I have just one line that designates that both TDs and THs get formatted with one border being 1 pixel solid black. It's the exact same thing as having the two of them separated. Alright, so my table, I want to play with a couple of other things. I would like my table to be centered on the page, and the way that we are going to do this is by manipulating the margin. Remember, the margin is the space from the outside of an element to the outside of the page. Now, I can tell you that my table is a block level element, but its block is only the width of this border right here, which means from here to the edge of my page and from here to the edge of the page, those are the margins. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to center it on the page, and the way that you center it on the page is by setting the margin equal to auto. And what that does is it will try to balance the borders or the margins on the left and right side of the table, therefore it becomes centered. So now what I've done is I created a table of TV shows. I have all the channels listed as to when the shows will be. And now I can see that show 1 is at this time on channel 1, show 1 is at this time on channel 2, and so forth. The thing is, it's not very pretty right now, so I want to fix a couple of things. I want my table basics to be Arial. I want my home link to be Arial. I want all of this text to be Arial. I want my footer to be Arial, and so forth. So what I am going to do is in my style, I am going to add body for the body of my page. And what styles do I want the body of my page to get? So the font family is going to be Arial, and if I don't have Arial installed, then just any other sans serif font. Okay, so I refresh the page, and now all of the stuff that's on the page is now formatted that same way. Now if I only wanted that to be applied to the table or to the caption or to the TD or the TH, then I would specify in its own section. I actually do have the ability to specify the things for just the caption for the table. So the caption, I want to set the font weight to bold. So now when I refresh this, now my font weight is bold. So I can specify the text for the whole body, everything that's in the body, under the body tag, or I can specify just the attributes for particular elements within that element's designation. The table still looks like something out of the 90s though, and the reason for it is these borders. We're not used to seeing borders like this anymore. This is the old style where they had space in between them. We used to make them look like they were embossed and things of that nature. It was just styles that we thought were cool back in the 90s, but now they're outdated. So I want to fix that. And the way that I do it is in my table CSS attributes, I'm going to add a new one for a tag called border collapse. And what this is on the outside of all of our borders, there is a 1 pixel white outline. And I want to get rid of that white outline, and by doing the border collapse, I have the option to do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the border collapse to just simply collapse. And what you'll notice is when I refresh the page over here, now it collapses that white space between the borders, and now they're just simply 1 shared pixel wide border between each element. We want to start styling this table a little bit better. Right now I have a couple of distinct sections of my table, but I haven't told the browser yet what they are. Right now I can look at this and I can see this is the caption. I can see that this row is what's called the heading. I can see that this is the body. And I want to add one more thing, which is called a footer. Okay, so let's say that channel 2 decided that they're not going to show show number 3 at 6 p.m. anymore. They're just simply taking it off the air. And now what I want to do is I want to create a row that keeps track of how many times each show was displayed. So what I'm going to do is make a TD here. This first one is going to be num shows. The next one is going to be the count of the number of times that this show is played. So this is channel 1, which is shown 3 times. And then channel 2 has shown 2 shows. Okay, so just simply to keep track of the number of times that each show was played. So this show, channel 3 had 3 shows, channel 2 had 2 shows. And it's just a way to count how much stuff is in here. All right, so what I want to do pardon me, is I want to start telling the browser what these sections are. And our tables have 3 distinct sections. They have what is called a T-head, which the T-head is going to go before and after the heading row. They have a T-body. And the T-body goes before the first row of the body data, and then it ends after the last row. And then I have a T-foot, which is our footer, which begins before the last row and ends after the last row. Okay, so what I want to do is, not what I want to do, but what I've done is I've specified what the sections are. So I can see that from here to here is my footer. From here to here is the body. From here to here is the head. And then now I have logically broken up the table into sections that the browser understands. Now I haven't really changed the look of this at all, but what I have done is I've given myself means to actually style these a different way. So now what I have is the ability to not just simply say TD, but I want to say that all of the TDs that are in the T-head section. So I actually can apply styles just to individual cells within the TD. Within the T-head. So I want to start playing with what are called structural pseudoclasses. And what it is I have this section now which is called T-head. And so my T-head contains things that are called THs. I have the TDs in the body and I have the THs in the head. Okay, so what I can do is I can specify that I want my THs to be formatted a specific way. So what I'm going to do is set the background color for each of these to something like 000033, which, remember, the first 2 values are red, the second 2 are green, and the last 2 are blue. So this is going to be a blue color. it's going to be kind of dark, so you won't be able to read the text. So what I want to do is change the color of the text to something that is almost white. And so now what I will end up with is something that looks like this. So what I've done is I've told it that, hey, this first head here, this TH, formatted a specific way. All right, so that means I no longer need this TH here, but now these are just simply TDs that exist in the T body. And then I also have the T foot TDs that can be formatted a certain way. So I'm going to take the T foot, set the background color to an almost blue also. Once again, change the color of my font so we can make it readable. And then now I have this. So I have a dark blue up here, a little bit lighter of a blue down here, but the font is still white in both of these so that we have a contrasting color. But if you notice, I've declared for TDs in two different spots, but these are only TDs that are contained within the T body. And this is only TDs that are contained in T foot. So what this does is makes it so I have logical means to break up what part of my data is what within the table. I want to play with this a little bit more, and instead of just simply saying for all the THs, I want to apply it to the entire row. Well, I can do the same thing here. Instead of TH, I'll say TR. And then I do the same thing with these. And then now it's not going to color individual cells, it'll color the whole row. And I end up with something that looks like this. Now notice what I've done is I've actually effectively gotten rid of my borders going across, because now I am applying the color to the entire row. I've gotten rid of the background, which included the border, so we color over top of it and it makes it look a little bit nicer. Okay, so I also want to do what is called banded rows. Now for you to see this actually happen, I am going to just simply copy and paste our shows. So we have some extra data. Okay, so what we'll have is something like this that just simply has some more rows, and it is just simply copied data that we already have. And what I want to do is I want to make it where every other row is colored a gray color. To add the banded rows, I'm going to play with what's called a structural pseudoclass. So instead of manipulating every TR, I want to manipulate all of the TRs that are on the page, but only ones that match a specific scenario. Okay, so what I'm going to say is my TR, and I have like the first of type, nth of type, the last of a type, all of those I can play with. So the one that I want to play with is what's called nth of type. And in parentheses, we put every however many we want it to do. So we can do odd, even. If I wanted to make every third row a certain color, I can put the number 3 inside of here. So for the purpose of this, I want to make it every even row. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to format them in a certain way where the background color is almost white, so we'll do ED, ED, ED. So they're going to be gray. And then when I refresh the page, I end up with something that looks like this. Okay, but I didn't want it to be the second one. I wanted to start with the first one. So I'm going to change this to odd. Save the page. And then I'll come over here and refresh. And now I have a problem. And the reason that I have the problem is because this TR will apply to the first of the type, odd, which means row 1, row 3, row 5, of all of the sections. And the problem is that CSS will apply all of the colors and all of the formatting in order. Okay, so as you come down through the page, the first thing that it does is it goes through the body and changes the font of everything in the body to Arial and sans serif. It actually does it for all of the elements. Then it looks at all of our tables and applies all of these formats to the tables. And then it looks in the T head and says, okay, well the T head TR format it this way. So it actually sets it to that blue background. And then it comes down a little bit more and it goes to the T body TRs and formats them with this type of border. Then it comes down to the T foot TRs, gives them this background color, which is that blue, and changes the font color to almost white. And then it does this one. And then this one says, hey, all of the odd rows, color them as gray. So what happened, and we didn't see it because the browser does it so fast, but what really happened was it applied blue to this line, and then it turned it gray again. So it actually did it. It applied the blue, down here in the foot, and then it colored both of them gray because of this. And the reason for it is, like I said, is just simply because we have to pay attention to the order that our CSS elements are contained. So the way to fix this is either going to be to move our TR up above where we applied it for the THs, or for the T head, or to specifically state what we really want this to apply to. I only want this to apply to the T body, so therefore I want to use the T body structural pseudoclass for nth of type. And then when I refresh my page, now it gets applied properly. So I want to make sure that I pay attention to not only the order that these get applied in, but also that I make sure that I only apply them to certain things that I really do want them to be applied to. In this lesson, you learned about how to create a table in HTML, the appropriate uses for tables, which it is not for the formatting of a web page. We do not ever want to use tables for formatting a web page. We learned about the basic table elements, such as table, TR, TD, TH, the table header, the TH, the body, T body, and the footer, T foot. And then we also learned about accessibility features for screen readers to make sure that everybody can understand the content even if they can't visually see it.